It was anticipated to be yet another typical sleepover, a tradition my best friend Lucas and I had maintained for as long as I could recall. Throughout our childhood, we had spent innumerable nights at each other's homes, staying awake late into the night, engaging in video games and discussing a myriad of topics. However, there was an unmistakable sense that this particular evening was different from the outset. Perhaps it was Lucas's unusual behavior throughout the day, as he playfully teased me more than normal, or the way his laughter seemed to resonate in the atmosphere longer than expected. Lucas was the type of person who was universally liked. Athletic, confident, and with a charm that seemed effortless. He was also completely straight, or at least that's what I'd always assumed, but there had been moments recently that made me question everything, like the way he looked at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention, or how he found excuses to touch me, a playful shove, a hand lingering on my shoulder just a second too long. We had been hanging out in my room all evening, sprawled out on the floor with snacks and a controller between us, battling it out in our favorite game. Lucas was in his usual spot, lying on his stomach, his shirt riding up just enough to expose the small of his back. I tried not to look, but my eyes had a mind of their own. "You're quiet tonight," Lucas said, suddenly glancing over at me. "Just focused," I replied, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. He smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Yeah, right, you're terrible at this game. You don't need focus, you need a miracle." I laughed, throwing a pillow at him. He caught it, effortlessly grinning as he tossed it back. "You're such a jerk," I said, shaking my head. "Yeah, but you love me," he shot back, his tone playful but with an edge that made my stomach flip. The game ended not long after, and Lucas stretched his shirt, lifting further to reveal the toned muscles of his stomach. He caught me looking and raised an eyebrow, a small smirk playing on his lips. "See something you like?" he teased, his voice light but his eyes watching me closely. I felt my face heat up, and I quickly looked away. "Shut up, Lucas," he laughed, leaning back on his hands. "Relax, man, I'm just messing with you." The atmosphere in the room shifted after that, the easygoing banter giving way to a tension. I couldn't quite place. Lucas seemed to sense it too, his movements slower, more deliberate, as he sat up and leaned against the bed. "You ever think about stuff?" he asked suddenly, his voice quieter than usual. "What kind of stuff?" I asked, my heart pounding. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know, like things you don't talk about with other people." I frowned, unsure of where he was going with this. "Yeah, I guess why, no reason," he said quickly, but the way he avoided my eyes told me there was more to it. The tension hung heavy between us as the night wore on. We eventually turned off the game and got ready for bed, Lucas changing into a pair of loose shorts and a t-shirt. While I tried not to stare, he caught me looking again, his lips twitching like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. When we finally climbed into our sleeping bags, the room was dark and quiet except for the sound of our breathing. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quite pin down. "Hey," Lucas said, softly breaking the silence. "Yeah, you ever wonder if things could be different?" How, I asked, my heart racing. "I don't know, just different," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned my head to look at him, his face barely visible in the dim light. "Lucas, what are you talking about?" He was quiet for a long moment before he finally spoke. "Forget it, I'm just tired." But I couldn't forget it, his words, his tone, the way he avoided my eyes. It all stayed with me as I lay there, wide awake, wondering what he wasn't telling me. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the fan by the window. I could hear Lucas's breathing, slow and steady, and I wondered if he had already fallen asleep. My own mind was restless, replaying our conversation and the strange energy that had been building between us all day. There was something in the way he had looked at me earlier, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. I turned over facing him, even though I could barely make out his silhouette in the dark. "Lucas," I whispered, unsure if I wanted him to respond or stay silent. "Yeah." His voice was soft, but I could hear the tension in it. "You awake?" "Clearly," he said with a small laugh, though it sounded forced. What's up?" I hesitated. The words caught in my throat. "Nothing, just couldn't sleep." He shifted in his sleeping bag, the sound of the fabric rustling filling the room. "Yeah, me neither," he admitted after a pause. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. There was another long silence, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sighed, his voice barely above a whisper. "You ever feel like you don't know who you are anymore?" His words caught me off guard. Lucas had always been so sure of himself, so confident. Hearing this vulnerability in his voice was strange, but also oddly comforting. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Why?" "I don't know," he said, his voice trailing off. I feel different lately, like I'm not sure what's real anymore." I frowned, my chest tightening at the raw emotion in his tone. "Lucas, you can talk to me, you know, about anything." "I know," he said, and this time his voice was firmer, more certain. "That's the thing. I want to talk, but I don't know how to say it." The air between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. I wanted to reach out to touch his shoulder or his hand to let him know I was there, but I stayed frozen, unsure of what he was trying to say. Then, to my surprise, Lucas pushed his sleeping bag aside and sat up. The faint moonlight streaming through the window caught the outline of his face, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "Have you ever felt confused about someone?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean?" He looked away, running a hand through his hair. Like you don't know how you feel about them, like they're in your head all the time, but you're not sure why." My breath hitched, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. The way he said it, the way his voice cracked just slightly, made it impossible to ignore the implication. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice barely audible. I felt that Lucas turned to look at me, then his eyes searching mine in the dark. "What did you do?" "I don't know. I guess I just tried to figure it out, tried to be honest with myself." He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do." The silence stretched between us, thick and almost unbearable. Then, in a move that I wasn't expecting, Lucas shifted closer, his knees brushing against mine. "Can I ask you something else?" he said, his voice quieter now. "Anything," I replied, though my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Have you ever felt that way about someone you shouldn't?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I felt my stomach twist, a mix of fear and hope swirling inside me. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. "You know what I mean," he said, his voice steady now, almost defiant. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, what he was trying to tell me. But before I could find the words, Lucas leaned in, his face so close that I could feel his breath on my Skin have you, he asked again, his voice. Barely more than a whisper. Yes, I admitted, my voice trembling. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. Then slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached out and brushed his hand against mine. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through me like electricity. I think I've been feeling that way about you, he said, his voice so quiet that I barely heard it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. This was the moment I had imagined so many times but never thought would actually happen. Lucas, I began, but he shook his head, cutting me off. Don't, he said, just don't say anything right now. I don't know what I'm doing, okay? I just know that I can't stop thinking about you, and it's driving me crazy. He looked at me, then his eyes wide and vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I don't want to ruin this, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was hesitant and unsure, but filled with an intensity that took my breath away. The kiss lingered in the air between us, leaving me stunned and breathless. Lucas pulled back slightly, his face still close to mine, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. I couldn't find the words to respond. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it might leap out of my chest. Say something, Lucas whispered, his voice tinged with nervousness. I opened my mouth, but the words got stuck in my throat. What was I supposed to say? That I had been dreaming of this moment for longer than I cared to admit. That I never thought it would actually happen. Instead, I managed a shaky, I don't know what to say. Lucas sat back, running a hand through his hair. I don't either, he admitted. I don't know what's wrong with me. You're my best friend. This shouldn't be happening. I shook my head, trying to process everything. Lucas, there's nothing wrong with you. These feelings, they're not something you can control. He looked at me, his expression filled with a mix of fear and relief. So you don't think I'm crazy? No, I said firmly, my voice steadier now. I think you're just figuring things out. Lucas sighed, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I don't even know what I'm feeling. All I know is that being around you lately, it's been different. I've been noticing things I didn't notice before, and it's been driving me insane. I felt a lump form in my throat at his words. What kind of things? I asked cautiously. He hesitated, his gaze flickering away before returning to mine. The way you smile when you're trying to hide that you're annoyed, the way you always play with your hands when you're nervous, how your voice gets quieter when you're talking about something you really care about. He paused, a small nervous laugh escaping his lips. God, it sounds so stupid when I say it out loud. It doesn't, I said quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. It doesn't sound stupid at all. Lucas looked at me, his expression softening. I've never felt this way before, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not about anyone. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and I realized this wasn't just some fleeting moment. For him, this was real, and it terrified him. I reached out, my hand resting lightly on his. Lucas, it's okay to be scared. I'm scared too, but you don't have to figure it all out right now. We can take it one step at a time. He nodded slowly, his fingers brushing against mine. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to lose you. You're not going to lose me, I said firmly. We'll figure it out together. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us no longer heavy but comforting. Then Lucas let out a shaky laugh, breaking the tension. Man, this is not how I thought tonight would Go me neither, I admitted, a small smile. Tugging at my lips, he looked at me, his eyes shining with a mix of emotions. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever thought about us? The question caught me off guard, but I knew I couldn't lie to him. Yeah, I said. Honestly, I've thought about it. Lucas raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a small smirk, and I didn't think it would ever happen, I admitted, my cheeks heating up. Well, he said, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a playful whisper, I guess we both underestimated each other. I laughed softly, the tension between us easing slightly, but then his expression grew serious again, his eyes searching mine. What happens now? I don't know, I said honestly, but I think that's okay. We don't have to have all the answers right now. He nodded, his hand brushing against mine again. Yeah, one step at a time. Right. Lucas hesitated for a moment before leaning in again, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was softer this time, more certain. It felt like a promise, unspoken, but understood. As the night stretched on, we stayed like that, tangled in each other's, exploring this new territory together. The world outside faded away, leaving only us and the quiet intimacy of the moment. The room felt smaller. Somehow the silence filled with unspoken words and uncharted emotions. Lucas's kiss lingered on my lips like an electric charge, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the best way possible. Neither of us seemed to know what to do next, as if we had stepped into a world where every rule had changed. Lucas let out a soft sigh, breaking the stillness. I can't believe I did that, he said, his voice a mix of amazement and nervous laughter. I tilted my head, studying him in the faint moonlight. Regrets? Already. His eyes snapped to mine, wide and sincere. No, God, no, he said quickly. I didn't know I had it in me. I smiled at his honesty, my heart swelling with something I couldn't quite name. You've always had it in you. Maybe you were just waiting for the right moment, he chuckled softly, running a hand through his messy hair. You make it sound like I planned this or something. Trust me, I didn't. Neither did I admitted, the truth of it making my chest tighten. But here we are. Lucas nodded, his gaze dropping to the space between us. Yeah. Here we are. For a while, we just sat there, the quiet of the night wrapping around us like a cocoon. I didn't want to break the spell, but there was a part of me that couldn't stop wondering where this left us. Lucas seemed to sense my hesitation because he shifted closer, his knee brushing against mine. You're overthinking again, he said gently, his lips curving into a knowing smile. Maybe, I admitted, unable to look away from him. Stop, he said, his voice low but firm. We'll figure it out together. His words sent a wave of warmth through me, and I realized just how much I trusted him. Lucas wasn't the kind of person to do anything halfway, and if he was willing to take this step, I knew it meant something. I'm not used to this, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. Neither am I, Lucas replied, his hand moving to rest lightly on mine. But maybe that's okay. Maybe it's better that we don't know what we're doing. I laughed softly, the tension easing slightly. You're always so confident. He raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eyes. Not always. You just bring out the best in me. The way he said it so effortlessly made my breath catch. Lucas had always been the one to joke around, to make light of everything, but now he was serious, his sincerity hitting me like a tidal wave. Do you mean that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Every word, he said, his gaze never leaving mine. Before I could respond, he leaned in again, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was deeper this time, more certain it was like he was pouring everything he couldn't say into that kiss, and I felt myself melting into him. The warmth of his hand on my skin, the way his breath mingled with mine, it was intoxicating. I couldn't focus on anything but him and the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. When he finally pulled back, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes searched mine for some kind of reassurance. Was that okay? He asked, his voice barely audible. I smiled, my heart pounding in my chest. More than okay. The relief on his face was immediate, and he let out a soft laugh, his shoulders relaxing. Good, because I was worried I was screwing this up. You couldn't if you tried, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Lucas's smile widened, and he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. You're incredible. You know that. I felt my cheeks heat up at his words, but I didn't look away. So are you? We stayed like that for what felt like hours, the weight of the world fading away as we lost ourselves in each other. Lucas's hand lingered on mine, his touch gentle but firm, as if he was afraid I might slip away eventually. The exhaustion of the day began to catch up with us, and we settled back into our sleeping bags, though neither of us seemed willing to fully let go of the moment. Lucas lay on his side facing me, his eyes soft and filled with something I couldn't quite name. Promise me something, he said, suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Anything, I replied without hesitation. Don't let me mess this up, he said, his tone serious. I don't want to lose you. You're not going to, I said, firmly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time. Lucas nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. One step at a time, he echoed, a small smile playing on his lips as the night stretched on, the quiet of the room wrapped around us like a blanket, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. Lucas's presence was steady and comforting, and for the first time in a long time I felt like everything might actually be okay. The sun was just starting to rise when I stirred awake, the faint light filtering through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. For a moment I forgot where I was, the events of the night before feeling like a distant dream. But then I turned my head and saw Lucas lying next to me, his face relaxed in sleep, and it all came rushing back. I lay there quietly, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, the peaceful expression on his face. He looked so different like this, so open and unguarded. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago we had crossed a line I never thought we would. Lucas stirred, his brow furrowing slightly as he opened his eyes. When his gaze met mine, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Morning, he said, his voice thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, my own smile forming in response. For a moment neither of us moved, the weight of the morning settling in around us, the reality of what had happened, of what we had admitted to each other, was beginning to sink in. Are you okay? Lucas asked, his voice soft and uncertain. I am, I said honestly. Are you? He nodded, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Yeah, I think so. I don't know what happens now, neither do I admitted, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right away. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. I guess it's just this is new for me. I've never felt like this before. Me neither, I said, my voice quiet but steady. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. He looked at me, then his expression serious. You're right, it doesn't, but I still feel like I'm going to mess this up. Somehow you won't, I said firmly, as long as we're honest with each other. We'll be fine. Lucas nodded slowly, his hand moving to rest lightly on mine. I don't want to lose you, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. You won't. I promised no matter what happens we'll figure it out together. He smiled at that, a genuine, relieved smile that made my chest feel lighter. Thanks, he said, his voice soft. For what? For being you, he said. Simply. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. We made breakfast together, the easy rhythm of our friendship still intact despite the shift in our relationship. There were moments of awkwardness, sure, a touch that lingered too long, a glance that spoke volumes, but they were fleeting, quickly replaced by the familiar comfort we had always shared. As the day wore on, I found myself wondering what would happen when we left this bubble we had created. Would things go back to normal, or would they change forever? Lucas seemed to sense my thoughts because he turned to me, his expression serious. Hey, he said, his voice steady. Weck. Figure this out, okay, one step at a time. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. That evening, as we sat together on the couch watching a film, Lucas extended his hand and grasped mine. This seemingly modest action conveyed a profound message. Neither of us uttered a word. There was no need to do so. For the first time in quite a while, everything felt as it should.